Your embassy interview is a make or break moment for your immigrant visa application. Hi, my name is Audra Doyle, and I'm the owner and attorney of Doyle Law here in Atlanta, Georgia. And today we're going to talk about a critical moment in your immigration journey, which is the embassy interview. I cannot emphasize enough the need for you to be prepared and successfully get through this part of your case. So let's go through how to prepare for the interview and some traps that you need to be aware of when going through the process. So what I'm talking about here is consular processing. You have a petitioner who has filed a case in the United States, such as an I-130 or an I-140 petition. The next step is that you have submitted documents to the National Visa Center. National Visa Center has gotten everything, they've accepted everything, and now finally the embassy or the consulate where you are located has said it's time for your interview, and you need to be ready for your big day. I'm going to give you some tips on how to get ready and once again give you some things to avoid. So how to get ready. Number one, you need to read every document that you or your petitioner has submitted to immigration. So for example, if you have a family-based case, go back and read that I-130 petition. Make yourself familiar with all the information on that application. If it's an employment-based case, there will be things like an employment letter. There could be maybe if it's a national interest waiver, there could be a table of contents or a cover letter explaining why you are qualified. You need to familiarize yourself with the petition that was filed with immigration. The second thing you need to do is go back and read your DS-260, and you need to review all of the documents that were submitted. Look for errors, look for typos, look for things on the DS-260 that don't match your petition. Be careful of those, and if you find a mistake, you may need to notify the embassy, hey, by the way, my petitioner's address is wrong on my DS-260, it's supposed to be this. So be aware of that, because they're looking for problems and they will probably notice things like that. So you need to be aware of those and be ready to handle that at your interview. The third thing to do to get ready is be prepared for the officer's questions. So if this is a family-based case, let's say it's a marriage-based application, they want to know, how did you meet? Where did you meet? When did you meet? How long did you date? When did you get engaged? Etc., etc. And those answers need to be correct. You cannot mess up and give the wrong information at the embassy. They could call your spouse in the United States, and if your spouse gives different answers, you are going to have a huge problem. They're looking for marriage fraud. They're looking for fraud in employment-based cases. So for example, if you have an employer sponsor and you get the job duties wrong, you don't know what job you're going to be doing in the U.S., you don't know where the job is located, you don't understand the business where you're going to be working, that is a big red flag for the embassy that shows that maybe this isn't a real case after all. And that is really what they're looking for. So let's talk about traps. How to avoid these traps. Number one is family relationships. In the United States, our culture has very clear family relationships. It is a yes or no question. It's not a well, sort of, maybe answer. So if you have a relation to someone, such as mother, father, grandfather, cousin, aunt, uncle, anything like that, that is your relative, and you need to clearly define who that person is. For example, if you are sponsoring your mother and they say, who is this person? You need to clearly be able to say, in American terms, that's my cousin, that's my aunt, that's my great-grandmother. You don't need to say, that's my friend of the family, when they're actually a relative. Because in America, our culture's views of families are yes or no. It's not about degrees of separation. So if you have a cousin, maybe they're your fourth or fifth cousin, that's still a cousin. That's still a relative. You have a common ancestor. So be very, very careful about identifying people with the proper terminology. For example, if you have married a distant cousin and you do not disclose that to the embassy right away and say, yes, there is a family relationship, they're going to look upon that with great concern and they're going to think you're hiding something. Maybe you just married your cousin because you want to help them come to the U.S. and maybe this is not a real relationship. On the same hand, same idea with employment-based cases. If you are being employed by your uncle, by your cousin, by somebody like that, that needs to be disclosed, and that should have been disclosed all along. So the embassy will be ready to ask you that question. You need to get it right. There is no going back and changing your answer later on. They will use whatever you say against you, not to help you. So it is highly important to be aware of these relationships, how the American officers are going to review them and view them. Here in the U.S., once again, it's either your relative or it's not your relative. It doesn't matter if you have only seen them once in your whole life. That's your cousin or that's not your cousin. So be careful of that. Another thing to be careful of is answering the questions and making sure that your answers match the information that has been provided before. So that's why you're going to be studying, and that can be a trap. So for example, if you say, I met my fiance, we were in Bahrain in 2017, but you never disclosed on your application that you visited Bahrain or you may have lived there. They will have a problem with that and they'll say, well, why didn't you tell us that before? They're looking for places where you are hiding information. Those are big red flags for the embassy. I guess the last trap that could happen is that they may have gone on your social media and they may ask you questions about your social media or your loved one or your employer's social media. So for example, I've seen it happen where they say, who is so-and-so? Well, the applicant didn't know that. It was the great-grandmother of her husband. She didn't know her great-grandmother, the husband's great-grandmother's name. So be familiar that, or be aware that whatever is on your social media, your spouse's social media, the employer's social media, that's fair game for the officer to ask you questions about that. And then once the case is decided at the embassy, there is no appeal process. If they say no, they're going to send the case back to the USCIS and they're going to recommend that the case be revoked. So it's a big deal. That revocation process to get it back to USCIS could take up to a year. So at the very least, you're going to have a huge delay if the interview goes badly. Now, this has been a long video, but it's important for you to understand, I think you've got it now, how important the embassy interview is, and you need to be well prepared for your big day. If you need assistance, let us know. Don't forget to follow the YouTube channel here and wait for more videos to help you with your immigration journey.